Sorry to put the podium up.
That's fine. That's
Okay.
perfect. All's good. Hello. Good evening.
Hello, Joyce.
Welcome to the Poetry Flash reading series. I'm Joyce Jenkins, editor and director. Tonight we are delighted to present Rose Black and Hannah Sward with Alex Green in conversation. Thanks to Harold Adler, thank you Harold, where you were, and the Art House Gallery and Cultural Center for this amazing space, and to our Poetry Flash assistant editor, Rosalinda Monroy, for her help, and thanks to Chris Felber for video. I'm very grateful. Poetry Flash readings are held both in person at various Berkeley venues and online. We also post videos of our events on our Poetry Flash YouTube channel. To join our mailing list to receive emails of future events, go to poetryflash.org and visit poetryflash.org to check out our book reviews, interviews, and calls for submissions, and to find upcoming news about Poetry Flash readings and other literary events all over this golden state. An insightful essay on Alicia Ostraker's poetry by Richard Silberg is our cover story this week. We have books available here for tonight's reading, ready for you to get them signed. The proceeds will benefit Poetry Flash. We also have Hannah Sward's memoir available online at bookshop.org/shop/poetryflash in case you decide to do it when you get home. And we have refreshments in the back.
Yes.
Here is Richard Silberg to introduce our readers tonight, Associate Editor of Poetry Flash.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. Rose Black, Hannah Sward. Rose is going to be reading first. She's got 3 books, A Clearing, Winter Light, and Green Field. The last 2 are on the table there. The first 2 is just slightly confusing. The first 2 are at Yale's Beinickel Library for the Yale Collection of American Literature. Hoo-ha! Now, Rose is, well, let me say, because it's very important for what's going to happen, that she has been teaching at Salinas Valley State Prison, and she's a founding member of Right to Write Press, which is a nonprofit that helps emerging prison writers. And we're going to hear some of those poems tonight. Rose's poetry is very unusual. It's cut back. It's as though seen through a child's eye. And it has wonder, it has distress, and some of it is kind of an atheist rapture. Let's give her a warm welcome, Rose Black.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Harold Adler, for allowing us to do this here. And I don't have the complete list of everybody else to thank, but thank you, everybody. I'd like to begin by honoring a couple of my students at Salinas Valley State Prison. And both of these students have spent a fair amount of time in the Secure Housing Unit, otherwise known as a SHU, S-H-U. And so first I'm going to read one of my own poems just to give you an idea of what they often have to deal with. This poem is called Circle of Holes. Mr. S knows I'm on the way up because he's been watching through tiny holes in a perforated circle in his metal door. This is how one is supposed to talk with a person in solitary. But Mr. S says we can hear each other better through the small crack between the door and the wall of his cell. This time, the guards don't search everything. They just told me to remove all staples and clips from my poetry lessons. They lowered a heavy protective vest from a hole in the ceiling and helped me put it on. The week before, a guard took away the metal clip that held my papers, then slashed the door jamb of his office 5 or 6 times. See? See what this can do? I can still see the long, deep scratches. I walk along the upper row of cages on the narrow walkway that trembles. I stop at cell number 213. Mr. S tells me he's fine, and I tell him we are studying Othello. Before Othello were the poems about truth and lies and in between. I unzip my suitcase and begin to pick the staples from the lessons. I slide Othello through the crack. Next, truth and lies, horses and hope, walls, and inside outside. Then comes weather with lightning, tornadoes, and snowstorms. The surreal with crystals, caves, and the lost river. I push through the San Quentin News, the Penn Handbook for Writers in Prison, and the American Friends Service Committee booklet, How to Survive in Solitary, can fit through the crack if I bend each book and feed it through half at a time. Gregory Orr's Poetry as Survival, however, is too thick. Mr. S instructs me to leave it on the floor in front of his cell. Someone will hand it to him later. We've been talking through the crack between the wall and the door, and now, before I leave, I tell Mr. S I want to see him. His face appears behind the circle of holes. He wears a gray t-shirt, and everything is gray. I put my hand on the circle of holes. Mr. S puts his hand on the other side. So I now I'm going to read these 2 poems by 2 of the most talented students I have, inmate students. And the first is by Jessica Diana Garza. And she was featured in this red Wheelbarrow, which is published by one of my teammates in 2016. And this magazine was promptly banned by the CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So she has never been able to see this book or have a copy of it. But we promptly, my organization, Right to Write Press, ordered 100 copies, and most of them have sold out in Berkeley. And I have a few left here on the table, and the proceeds will go to Poetry Flash. And in each book, there's a copy of the letter from the CDCR explaining why this is just obscene. So that's that. But the poem of hers that I'm going to read tonight is called War Came Calling. She's a very talented artist, by the way, so she's mostly does visual work. But she's a good writer as well. War Came Calling by Jessica Diana Garza. War came calling when I was a child. What could a child know of war? Smell of beer, drunken, angry words, ready to blow up, kaboom! Smell of sweat and blood, of fear, red welts, blue-black bruises, a fat lip. We children looked upward for help, saw a sky startled by the fight. Who, he asked, intervenes in wars? A time when war came overseas to rice fields and jungles. It colored red the army of green locusts where the helicopters landed. Their swirling blades mimicked the jungle's rapidly firing bullets. Pow, pow, rat-a-tat-tat. Soldiers mowed down, never came home. A favorite uncle called to war in Vietnam. While fathers' voices thundered at home, shaken, awakened children ran and hid in closets, crawled under beds. The child I was so long ago lay in the dark trembling when war came calling. Mirror reflection prison bars on darkly shaded glasses hide my pin-pupiled eyes that grew up too fast when war came calling. So the next poem is by Ubalde Teke Jr., who's from Guatemala. And his first collection of poems and essays, Niño Inmigrante, was published by the nonprofit I am a founding member of. There are 5 of us. Actually, Hannah is a member of the board as well. And these are available on Amazon, okay? This is his first collection of poems and essays, and it's beautiful. But the poem I'm going to read now won first prize in the California Prison Poetry Contest, and there were over 1,000 entries, perhaps several thousand, we're not quite sure. And so this is that wonderful poem called Fragments. Chipped gray and white stones lay on the path in front of my hogar in Guate, sharp and close to my bare feet as I walked or jogged. Dark gray stones, heavy like a rim slug, were the ammunition for my slingshot. I helped stones relocate by shooting them at hungry foxes and dogs. To my ancestors, stones were Earth's jewelry, hot and shiny on blistering days, icy and delicate at night. Here in my cell, I have a small dirt-clothed rock, keeping me company. A gift from the Creator, it spoke to me while I was strolling the track. I caress and talk to this stone on depressing days. I let it know my desire for freedom, because we're both hard-boiled and contained to one place for long periods of time. So, stones are very important to me as well. My husband, Robert, and I had a business selling stone to stone sculptors, and we had a studio for over 35 years. And now, let's see, what else do I have to say about that? Just that I will now read 2 stone poems. The first is called I Live in the Stone. Inside the stone is a stone yard where my lover carves black granite mountains. I carve the low tide and new moon. In the mud, we find milk and green pennies. In the tar of the roof, wild radish, white stars. In the wind-stripped soil, visible roots. In the garden, bare shadows, brown lizards. Inside the stone yard, inside the stone. God as stones in wind. The wind moves through these stones. It enters at night. In moonlight, they cast shadows. A person could climb these fences if a person wanted. A person could stay or leave. Shh. When I was 3, we had so many little rabbits. I'd stroke their ears. Sweetie, snowy, midnight. No one remembers if we ate them. I recall there was a war. I recall my father ate rabbits in the woods of Terre Haute. The circle on the hill of the highest house is an arrangement of 42 stones. Within a 7-pointed star, 7 stones lie between each point. We can no longer find the heavenly bodies. I once had a lover who called me dearest angel. He told me if I wanted to know who he was, it was all in his play. I never read it, tossed it out, the baby never born. We live among stones and wind. Each day we sweep the shadows by our gate. So near my stone yard is a place where my husband and I walked dogs for decades, and it's on the Martin Luther King Jr. regional shoreline. It's called Oyster Bay. So my next poem is called Dogs of Oyster Bay. Morning moon still in the sky, Champ and I round the corner of Neptune Drive and make our way toward Oyster Bay. Its oysters long gone. We weave past chunks of cement, rusty metal, and methane collection tubes poking from cordgrass and brackish salt marshes. We climb landfill that covers recycled trash, and who knows what lies beneath our feet in this place of constant change and surprise. Perhaps once right here, a thatched hut, open to night, was built and abandoned by an Ohlone hunter. Bright stars shone through walls of dried grass, lattice of saplings. For years, on unmarked trails, we have been walking this wilderness where people do not learn each other's names. We come here because our dogs need to be here, to roam. We notice what our dogs notice: hawks, egrets, rabbits, mice, roots of wild radish. Soon all of this too may be covered over. Who knows what will prevail? We learn the names and nature of each other's dogs, the dogs of Oyster Bay. We watch as they run the line of earth and sky through improbable flowers. And here is another dog poem. It's called Feeding the Dog. Scoop the food out of the bag with the orange plastic cup. The bag has no bottom and sinks through the floor into the earth. The dog waits. Wagging speaks of what comes next. He's had enough, but wants more. I scoop more brownish gray pellets into the cup, again and again and again. Better to err with too much than too little. Soon, the entire yard is covered with dog food, mountains of dog food. It's spilling into the street and over the fence into the neighbor's yard. I'll never again be accused of not answering any creature's I need and I want, or the tap tap of his tail on the linoleum floor from side to side, eyes focused and tongue flicking quick over his open red mouth and lips, and again, and it's a human dog, and 100 dogs. I'm feeding all the dogs and people in the neighborhood, the country, the world. There is no animal in this universe that I am not taking care of. They rush to me and the bottomless bag. If I try to walk away, I'll just stumble on the slick, licked pieces of what I've already laid out. Oh, I forgot to say, I wanted to say that all of my dogs have been poets. So I've had Basho, Dante, now there's Rumi, a Leon Berger who weighs 160 pounds. When I was growing up in Washington, D.C., we always had dogs. We had dogs and we had gardens. And this next poem is about my father, and it is called Cutting Grass. When it came my turn, my father tried to make a safe and easy outline for me. In the humid DC summers, sweat dripped from his forehead as he guided our noisy mower underneath thickets and brambles, over ruts and roots of apple tree and maple. His undershirt wet as he strained towards the places where stones could fly up, where the mower could get jammed. He did the hard part, left me enclosures with measured centers, squares, and circles of grasses, nothing too tall or wild. All summer, I followed the lines he made. His rules were clear. Always wear a hat and closed-toe shoes. Avoid midday heat. Notice what might slow you down or hurt you. And in those days, the fresh-cut grass was the green early morning. And because I understood my father's draw to untamed things, and because I too yearned for obstacles, I could not stay there. And this is one more poem about my father. It's called Dandelion. Dandelion leaves toss jagged bitter limp in bacon grease and apple cider vinegar with red potatoes, purple onion, crumbled bits of hard-boiled egg. Early spring, he took me out for the gathering, out between the railroad tracks, through vacant lots. We carried trowels and paper bags. His clothes had holes, and he wore an old beret. Listen, he said, things are often not the way they seem. A weed is in the eye of the beholder. People hate this plant, he said, eyes bright, but they don't know anything about it. Piss herb. We call it piss herb, the best diuretic you can get. Leaves and stalks for kidneys, roots for the liver. Or eat it just because it tastes so good. Try this, he said to the neighbors. You must try this. Look, he said, the ground is wet, the plants are young, and it's early in the morning. Put the trowel underneath and lift them steadily, carefully. Make sure the water is cold when you clean them, and always tear the leaves. We thus filled our bags with the out-of-favor wild things, with the jagged teeth of the lion. And on those same railroad tracks where we gathered the dandelions, there was a streetcar or trolley car, like a cable car in San Francisco. It was the number 20. And this next poem is about that. It's called Wild Ride. The number 20 streetcar raced along the bluff above the C&O Canal on its way to Cabin John. City dwellers called it a wild ride, perhaps because of the wilderness along these stretches, or perhaps because here the driver picked up speed, tossing nervous passengers from side to side. We riders had to hold on. For extra fun, the conductor let teenage boys take turns driving. Paw Paw Tunnel flickered the face of a dead man right at its entrance, beckoning. But the real wild ride was the roller coaster at Glen Echo, our destination. After a few small dips, it would climb way up, then when it stopped high at the top, there'd be a sudden jolt and backwards lurch. For 1 second, everything so still. We'd hold our breath as we peered down the deep descent. Our little car could be flung off into space, and we'd all be smashed to pieces. Going home on the number 20, I saw stars, the Milky Way. It didn't matter if I missed my stop, because in those days, I could find my way back. The wild ride would become a weaving, a rocking, a clickety-clickety, as I stepped off again and again into the cold, turbulent night. I want to touch the stars behind this heavy dirt gray dome. I know they are there because I once looked up and saw them traveling. I was lying beside a boy that night on a red-rocked desert mountain. And although the bus that brought us there had traveled on for days and then broke down, we stepped out into circles of stars and opened to what held us. We were 15, still rooted to earth. Seeds of bright violence flashed across the sky that night, so beautiful, racing so fast, calling out. The star shower, it was everything, and then it was over. In the morning, barefoot beside the warm stream, we each found a stone with flecks of rust and silver, and we carried our stones through the years. Who knew how hungry we become, how thin and cold the spaces we would wrestle? I live in a place that hides the stars. The boy from that night, no longer alive. The door must be found inside. I hold my stone of the morning, tasting the quiet fires. Oh. This is from one of my older books. It's called Fortune Telling. Who knows whether I would have worn the Indian bedspreads and planted the radishes and beets if it hadn't been what Jake wanted. Of course, nothing would grow in that hard clay behind our house, ground laced with old roots, acid from the needles of the redwoods. The houses around us were empty, windows with no one on the other side. But we spread open our quilts and lay down beside winter fires. We walked on the ridges in the rain. I in my cloak that Jake made from scraps of dyed leather, wine red, yellow, pine green. I bought a fortune-telling dress with an embroidered red hand pointing down, a bell at the tip of every finger. Around the waist curled a serpent. I studied a book about lines of the palm, the lifelines that move diagonally across and sometimes curl under the thumb, the love lines and the dangers, the places where the lines are weak or broken. Jake left me for a woman who could bake bread and smoke weed, who painted murals of sand-colored circus women, some upside down, some on horses. She lived 20 years in the house Jake and I built. Jake's going to call you, a friend said one day. When Jake called, I thought about my fortune-telling dress, packed away in the clothes trunk, as he talked about his ex-wife and his new girlfriend. He said there had always been room in that house for all of us. What I will hold on the last day of the world. A tin of morphine, like miners carry, to avoid prolonged pain. An empty house. The warmth of shared adversity. A coin for the boatman. The fixed star. The tears of the neighbor in trouble. A prisoner who became a poet. I was his teacher. I was his teacher. And the joke of it, me, a poet who struggles with poems. Didn't Ellsberg say we were on the Titanic? Didn't he say all of us? Preferring to go full speed ahead, no lifeboats. As I meet my end, I will hold my 2 dogs from the mountains, one gray and one gold, and my husband's gift, a worry stone of carnelian, mottled and cracked, earth thread, stone of life, protection for the journey on the last day of the world. And now this is my last poem, and it's called God Prefers Us Naked. Do you know about the rapture? How after the battle of Armageddon, the righteous will be lifted out of their clothes right up into the sky? Perhaps on their way to heaven, they'll be undressed by snowy angels, soft angel fingers unzipping and unbuttoning, gently lifting out bare arms and legs, pants, shirts, dresses, socks, underwear of the righteous, all fluttering down upon the trees and rivers, golden sand. Then, whoosh, the naked whisked straight up to the right hand of God. All the others, like me, will be burned on the spot. But maybe if I beat God to it, rip off all my clothes in front of strangers, say, look, say to God, look, I don't believe in you, but look, wrinkled skin, clogged blood, brittle bone, warts and moles, say, look, this is what I'm made of. Then maybe God will get confused, impressed, stop right in his tracks, say, what the hell is going on here? Say to himself, hey, maybe I'll spare this one, naked as a baby, who's already halfway there.
Rose Black. That was her first reading in 3 years,
That's
right?
right.
All right. And the nakedness is a kind of a weird segue to you, Hannah, to strip.
That's right.
Hannah Sward is the daughter of Robert Sward, who actually was a wonderful poet who read several times in our series. She's widely published. She has been the editor and columnist for Third Street, Villager, Los Angeles. She is a frequent contributor to Erotic Review, hoo-ha, and she is the author of Strip. And Strip is written, it's written in a first person. It's an intimate voice, a voice that asks you in or opens your trip with her. And it's a grueling trip. Her mother split when she was 2, left her father. Reading Strip, it's not at all loveless. There's a lot of love in this young woman's life, but there is a bewildering array of mates for father and mother. She's only seeing her mother, I guess, once a year in summertime. And so there's not solidity, love, but not solidity. When she was 6, she was abused by this man in a brown car. I actually don't want to talk too long, but she's swinging and she went into his car and ugly things happen. She becomes, there's Rilke. Is Rilke named for the poet? Rilke is her half-sister, really the companion of her life, and they get into erotic dancing into prostitution, into being, I guess, the lollipop of a series of sugar daddies, and addiction, speed, and drinking. And so it's a grueling trip that is kind of a circle back to the beginning with mother and father, and things seem to have come out okay. I hope that's all true. She's going to read for a while. She's going to be in conversation with Alex Green, who is on the faculty of St. Mary's College of California, is the editor of Stereo Embers magazine, and is a moderator and host for many different organizations, but Litquake, for the St. Mary's reading series, and so forth. He's an extensive, excellent moderator. So why don't I get off and welcome Hannah Sward up here?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Oh, sure. Thank you so much, Harold. First of all, thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor. And to Poetry Flash, to Joyce, and to Richard and Harold, thank you for opening up your beautiful space. And this is particularly poignant to me because last year Poetry Flash did a beautiful tribute for my father, Robert Sward, and so beautiful. I've read that piece many times, and so that I get to come here for the first time with Strip, it feels full circle, with his passing and the birth of my book. So I'm just going to read one chapter, which is a page and a half, just to brace you, and then I'm gonna be in conversation with Alex Green, which I'm just thrilled about. He's wonderful, as you shared, Richard. So the book is called Strip, and this particular chapter is called Oysters, Blackberries, and Dad's Typewriting. Spring 1975, Lasqueti Island. Dad and me are living on a houseboat near Victoria, Lasqueti Island. I eat oysters, pick blackberries, and brush my teeth with baking soda. Dad forgot toothpaste. There are no stores, cars, or other people except my friend Isabel, whose parents sail her over on their boat. We roll a log from the shore into the water, hold on and kick our feet. We are naked. On the log we kick, wave our arms, staying steady even when the water gets wavy. Some days I climb the big rocks while Dad writes. If I can't hear the click-click of the typewriter, I know I've gone too far. There are foxes and maybe bears in the forest. I don't go into the forest alone, only with Dad. When he comes with me into the forest, he takes my hand into his. I feel so safe. I want to walk with him forever into the forest of sounds and for him to never let go of my hand. Those are my favorite days. We eat oatmeal, and when Dad rolls up his pants and walks into the water, he catches slimy, pretty oysters and crabs to eat. He lays them on the sand, goes back for more. Sometimes the oysters give us pearls, and I set them on the windowsill. We squeeze lemons for lemonade, pick blackberries in the bushes, come back with purple-stained fingers. Dad is on the shore, cross-legged, with his black journal on his lap, pen in hand. I sit on the edge of the dock, feet in the water, and I have my own journal on my lap. I write in mine every day, just like he does. His eyes are fixed on the clear, gray, blue water. Shades of darkness, ripples, then smooth, ripples again. I like night on the houseboat. I lay on the dock. So many stars. The sky gets all glittered up like it's going out dancing. Now, I'll explain, and also I want to just thank Rose for the beautiful reading to begin with. Yeah, I've known Rose since I was, for many decades now. Yeah.
So,
Hi, Alex.
hi. I was thinking about how the stories of our lives we carry around with us every day, and we tell ourselves stories about those stories, and that's kind of a private exercise. Like, what do they mean? What do they teach us? What do they, what's their significance in our lives? And so, again, that's a private thing. Writing about them is very public. How did that feel to sort of make that leap? Because you've carried this stuff around with you since you were, obviously, your whole life. So how was the experience of turning that into a public reveal, I guess is the best way to say it?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Alex. I think, for one, I had been publishing short stories and excerpts from it, not knowing I was going to be publishing a book, because it was never my desire to write a book, to be honest. And so I had been publishing for quite a number of years, and writing articles about sugar daddies and my addiction and Madame Ava and turning orange when I first got sober. That's not in the book, actually. So I think there was this organic process with bringing it out and sharing those stories. However, there were definitely periods when I was writing it that I was holding back. I had an incredible mentor, editor, who's about, I think, 87 now. And when, I guess I'm going beyond the question. Yeah, I'll end there.
But so sort of like you were sort of taking batting practice for what ended up being the book. So it's almost like you were writing the book and you didn't know it.
Right.
Right?
That's right, yes. Yeah, and I had also been doing readings and involved in the literary community, sharing my work at some level. So I think there was this practice of it. And bringing the whole thing out, though, is very different. And at times, depending on what the platform has been, it's been at times uncomfortable, at times joyful, incredibly engaging, rewarding, nourishing. And I had done a podcast, that's how I met Alex, and his was really one of my favorites. Just really got the book, and that's, yeah.
Well, thank you for that, by the way. That's very nice of you to say. I'm trying to repeat any questions I've already asked you. That's the challenge. But the discomfort that you're talking about, that can scare people off. And it seems like, did it ever make you go, maybe that's too much? Or did you feel comfortable staring that down?
Well, actually, thank you for that question again, because that was what I was going to answer when I stopped myself to not go on too long. I did stop myself. And going back to that, a wonderful mentor editor that I had, I would meet with her every Sunday and bring my pages. And I read one particular scene where I'm in Peninsula, a fancy hotel in Los Angeles with a man. And I wrote that scene and I brought it to her, sitting on her couch with her. I remember reading the pages and she stopped me and she said, "Something's missing." And I get chills because that kind of relationship with an editor is just exquisite, right? She was right. And she said, "Go home and write what you didn't want to write." And I don't know how she knew that I was leaving out the part that I was, that's now in the book. Yeah, and I didn't want to share that part.
Because it was too painful.
Yes, one, too painful to write and to go back there, while also staying with myself and I just felt so vulnerable sharing that. It was uncomfortable to write, and I felt ashamed.
It's weird how every editor is also like a therapist in some way, right?
Yeah.
The process of writing, there was a moment where you went, okay, I guess I'm doing this, and there is no turning back. Was there ever a thought where you thought, no, I don't think I want to do this, like it's too much, I maybe just want to scrap this whole thing? Or did you pass that juncture where you were sort of, this is happening, I am writing this book?
I definitely, the first part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because at first I wasn't sure it was going to be a book, and I just wanted to write again. I wanted to put pen to paper, so I wasn't thinking about the result. And it took me a long time to write this book. One of the things that I speak to often is learning to sit with myself, to put that pen to paper, to tolerate and have the capacity to go to those places and literally to sit, because being on drugs for so long, and the particular drug that I was addicted to was, amphetamines, I wasn't sitting for about a decade. So, and then the publishing aspect, I put it to the side. I went through 2 agents. I went through a first and I said, I don't want any part of this anymore. And I put, there was many different points of it.
There's so many things that happened in your life. How did you decide, because we talked about music, right? Like, how did you, because there was, the Chili Peppers, Jane's Addiction, were all in your sort of, in your kind of realm. That wasn't in the book. So how did you decide what made it in and what didn't make it in? Like, how did you make that decision?
That was really hard because I had about 100 different documents on the computer, as probably many of us authors or writers do. And I didn't know what was what. I had just written nonstop for a couple of years before I went back in to look at what I had. And that is a hard part. That was the hardest part, because sitting, again, by that point I had enough recovery, enough wherewithal within myself to sit with myself for longer periods of time, to really take a look at the body of work and start weeding out what wasn't strong. Not just what was not strong, but what didn't serve the story, because there's so much that's not in the book. Sometimes I forget what's in there and what's not. And a lot did not make it in.
When you think about what you've learned about yourself, because again, the things we tell ourselves about ourselves, every time you have a memory, it's a memory of the memory, right?
Yeah.
And you build these kind of narratives about yourself. When you look at the book and the final product, were you surprised how the story that you tell yourself about yourself, was it different or was it the same?
That's very interesting.
I should have called you beforehand to say I was going to ask you that question.
No.
Kind of a hard one.
different in that I didn't realize how many fragments and how fragmented I was. And weaving that together created some kind of narrative. I think that it did look different. And I got to, I think I'm blanking on your question, but I think I kind of answered it.
What I like about the book so much, there's so much that I love about it, but there's this kind of elegant strength that you have where nobody would blame you for assuming the fetal position and crawling under something for a while, right? But you don't. You just keep going. There's always a new scheme, or there's always it reminds me of like Looney Tunes cartoons where it's like the character gets smashed and the next frame they're at it again, right? It's like the anvil fell on me and now it's off and now here I am again. You just keep going, you just keep trying. So for me it's like those moments that could have been filled with a kind of quitting, right? I'm just gonna stop this, or I'm gonna whatever. There's a resilience there that is throughout these pages where you just never gave up on yourself. That's what I got from it. I don't know if that is that a right read?
No, I felt like I gave up on myself. I did. I was that hopelessness, desperation, loneliness, and having been in the addiction for so many years, I did not ever see a way out. I thought that was it. I thought I would be a woman that always hated myself and was full of shame, and that, I always share this, but I would see, women and men buy flowers for themselves at the farmer's market. And I'd be coming out of a 3-day meth run, and I would see that. I'd be like, oh, that's what I want more than anything. I want to be able to be one of those people that buy organic basil. So I did, and I also hear what you're saying. There was something, I think, and something bigger than myself that did keep me going. And there was also this love of life, even in that, I think. Maybe there was a part of me that knew that one day, or maybe it was a hope, that I would share my story.
The organic basil is sort of like, I get it, because it's like a baseline for normalcy, right? If you're buying organic basil at the farmer's market, things are probably okay, right? So it's almost like you were striving for a normal, whatever that means, a normal basil-filled, organic basil-filled life. Do you feel close to that now?
Yes, I do. I always had this sense growing up that I wouldn't be the kind of woman I'd want to be until I was 50. And that's true. And I am that woman today. Not every moment, not every day. Some weeks, not even. But I am. And there's been it's a gift. Because I never thought it was possible. And one of the things that I've loved about bringing this book into the world is getting to connect with so many women and men, and who, as I understand it, felt similarly at some point in their life. And that's possible. It's not even in the details, but in the feelings, because we all have different details in our story. Right? But that desperation and the hope for connection's really what I was seeking. And I was very disconnected from myself. So writing the book brought me to connecting with myself. And then I was able to also connect with
in terms of self-examination, are you one of those people where every day you're thinking about yourself in that way? In the way, I mean, because the book is, there's so much in the book, there's so much happening. Are you still examining that? I mean, because in some ways it's sort of like you write it and it's out there, and then that sort of Buddhist way you can acknowledge it and then dismiss it, right? It's out there, I don't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
But are you still thinking about it, and now that you've written about it, are you thinking about it in a different way?
It's interesting because I go to a lot of author readings that are not mine, and I hear often that people are like, I wrote it and it's done and it's in the past and it's a part of me and it always will be. And there are parts where I wish I was beyond it. I'm still in therapy and stuff will come up. I'm like, isn't this done? Like, am I not done with this yet? Right? Because it shows up in different ways. In other areas, I have moved on, and I no longer feel like that filled of shame and self-hatred.
There's the moment that Richard was referring to in the book with in the van, that horrible scene early on when you're a child. In the book, there's an absence of discussion about it, and you and I talked about being from Jewish families. We talk about everything, right? It's sort of like everything is discussed, and that didn't seem like it got any airtime in your family. And I was wondering, I meant to ask you about that last time. A, is that weird, right? And B, why didn't it, or did it? And maybe it just isn't in the book.
It didn't. One, I think it was a different time where these things weren't talked about. I think there wasn't even the word abducted, or certainly wasn't Amber Alerts. So I think it was the time. I also think my parents, my father read poetry. That was what I loved most about him. It's also the part where he wasn't always present. And for anyone who knows me knows read the book. I adore my father. I love him. And people are mixed. And there was no discussion of it. And I think that is a really big part of, my stepmother, she got angry at me. So that was the conversation, was getting in trouble and stuffing it down.
Yeah, because the conversation around that has really become much more progressive, feels like the wrong word, but there's much more talk about it.
Yes, yeah.
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 Yeah. Did the book also deepen your relationship with your father, like writing, knowing what it was like to write as a discipline, carrying through a project? Did it, and I don't want to give away anything on the ending, but it comes full circle in one of the most beautiful ways I've ever read in a book with your father. And did it sort of deepen that relationship a bit more, give it more texture?
I love that question. I think in the sense that since I was able to connect more with myself, I was able to connect more with him. In that sense, I don't know so much about the discipline of writing, because I always forget that I always was writing, and I did have this discipline even in my addiction. I don't know how that happened, but I was, and I think perhaps that got that from my father. I was talking with Rose earlier. He was very driven, an ambitious poet, which is kind of a funny thing to say, an ambitious poet. Yeah, I think it must have on some level. It must have. Yeah. He wanted to read it along the way. He definitely asked for chapters, and that would have been something. I don't know what that would have done.
Did he know about your life? Did he know about what you've gone through?
He did and he didn't. Depends on I think where he was that day, sometimes I would be like, how could, like, he, like I talk about in the book, he's writing poetry in his head always. He did, though. Because I remember I had published a piece about sugar daddies in and out of sobriety for a recovery magazine. And I forgot to block him on Facebook when I posted it. And he read it, and that didn't go very well. He was, and he wasn't angry, he was very, very concerned. And he knew, because along the way I was telling him, I wasn't telling him about the prostitution, but he knew I worked at a strip club at one point. I had made amends to him with my addiction. So he knew parts of it.
Speaking of family relationships, how important was your sister to you and to your survival, really? Because there's a moment when she moves away where I think, oh no, don't go, because it feels like you guys were keeping each other alive, and I was so worried about what would happen without her. How important was that relationship and that really, sort of crucial time in your life, that closeness? And I'm guessing you guys are still really very tight.
Yes, she lives, we have our sister dates every week, pretty much. But it's healthy, not enmeshed anymore.
Right. But you were keeping each other afloat at that.
That's true, yeah.
David Lee Roth of Van Halen, seems like the right time to bring him up now. He once said that you have your whole life to write your first album, and you've got a year to write your second. And I think I asked you this on Thanksgiving. I just keep putting pressure on you. But how are you in terms of writing as a discipline for book 2? Where are you with that? I think I'm nagging you now.
No, I don't even remember that.
Oh, okay.
And I love it that's right, we did have a podcast on Thanksgiving, which is very interesting. In the book, there is something that happens on Thanksgiving, so it was great to make a new memory on that. With the next book, I'm staying with Rose, who just, read the poetry before, for those of you who came in late. And I've asked her for lectures on that because lectures in the sense of just take it down a notch. So in answer to that, I actually did not write for a year up until 2 months ago. I was writing, but I was doing all the interviews and Q&As, writing for the publicity of the book. And that's not true. Actually, what's really strange is after my dad died, I was commissioned to write a story for this London, a women's London library on erotica. And I just thought, well, this is not the time. Like, I'm not in that space right now. And I did end up doing it. So I wrote that right after. So I guess I wrote a little bit. But in terms of the discipline, I had to really put that aside. And I am back at it. And when I start, I write every day right now in my journal, because I think journal writing is really important. But in terms of the next book, I did open a document yesterday at Rose's, and I had been putting off looking at that document for the last 3 months, a story collection. And so I opened it yesterday, and I could feel myself start crying, so I'm like, this is just terrible. What a big mess. And then Rose straightened me out. And we had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Tom Waits says that great line where just because your line isn't in the water doesn't mean you're not thinking about fishing. So even when you weren't writing, were you thinking about it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting with the discipline and with a next book. because I have to be really careful of why I'm doing it and what I'm doing it for. Right? Yeah, and that's tricky sometimes.
Well, I love your book, and I've told you that a million times, and I wish you a life filled with organic basil. But I love this book, and I love chatting with you again.
Thank you so much, Alex. I will say the next book will be about love, jealousy, and affairs. Nothing about addiction or anything. Well, maybe someone else, but not myself. Yeah. But Alex, thank you, and thank you again, Joyce and Harold and Richard. What an amazing opening. I want to write that down and use it for the synopsis. I was like, this is great. And Rose.
Just wanted to thank you all for coming and joining us tonight. And you'll be seeing this later on YouTube. And please check out poetryflash.org. Thanks to you all, and have some refreshments back there and books up here. Thanks.